So much for joining us here today for our Friday weekly webinar. We're going to be talking about adjusting through PERM, a guide to navigate the PERM labor certification process. And today we are joined by attorney Powers. And she is going to give us all the amazing information as an experienced and board certified immigration attorney. I'm going to give you guys a little background on her, just show off for managing attorney a little bit. So Attorney Powers founded PLG in November 2009. So it's been a while, guys. She's a board certified immigration attorney, so she kind of knows her stuff. Also, she is an author. So whenever she's not, fighting for your case and doing all that extra super mom stuff, she also writes books. I mean, who would have thought, am I right? And she also founded.
It's fun so far.
And she founded Power Strategy in 2020. So Ruby's been doing awesome stuff, whenever she has some free time. And we're going to go ahead and let her take it away with the learning objectives on what is a PERM labor certification even.
All right. Well, so thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to just give you a brief overview on a complex area, but just to give you a little bit more information. This doesn't take the place of a consultation, but if you're just wanting to know a little bit more so that when you do go to an attorney for a consult, you're more empowered with that information and have a better understanding of how things run. Processing times are always changing. Things are in flux. So we're recording this on May 21st, 2021. But we, for the most part, it's holding true. There hasn't been a lot of changes in the PERM arena. So we'll go ahead and get started, but everything from what is it to what are some of the requirements and what does it look like? And, if you do want to have a consultation, maybe for yourself for the first, or maybe you bring your employer with us, you can give us a call at the information we have provided so that you can have more of that conversation and to go into more detail. Generally, when we do have a consult, it's usually about a two-part, maybe one, a preliminary to make sure that this is the right round, and then two, we'll go into a lot more detail of a lot of what I'm mentioning in this webinar today of what does it look like and what would you need to do to prepare for it. So this was created, in the PERM process is created in March 2005, and it's actually called the Program Electronic Review Management. So the government always loves to make fun acronyms. So a crucial step in processing for applying for an employment-based green card. A lot of times people say, oh, so-and-so wants to sponsor me. My company wants to sponsor me. What I find is people usually say sponsor for lots of different things. Do you mean sponsor like for an H-1B? Do you mean sponsor like my affidavit of support, I-64? Do you mean sponsor like to get a green card? And so my front desk, my receptionists are trained to ask them more of these questions because people, it's understandable. It's a confusing area. But when we're talking about this, we're talking about the employer testing the labor market and basically sponsoring an employee for a legal permanent residency for a green card. So the primary objective is to protect the U.S. workers in the job market and make sure that available jobs that could otherwise be filled by qualified U.S. workers are not that are not procured by foreign nationals if a U.S. worker is available to do that job. But basically, by doing the system, we may find out very likely that there is no U.S. worker for that specific position, and therefore, people need to do business, and we don't want the business to suffer because they cannot find a qualifying worker, and then this is how they can remedy that. So, prior to the PERM system, I have some birds flying in front of my tree in front of my office. So they're very distracting. Prior to the PERM system, labor certifications involved dealing with the DOL and various related state agencies in every step of the process. It was very lengthy, didn't have adequate resources, usually took a few years. But this PERM process that came out in 2005, and I've, not to date myself, but I guess I will. I've been I've been practicing law since 2008, but I was in law school in 2005. So about the same time that I've been in law school, this has been going on or practicing. It was designed to streamline the complicated process. And so that's what we have. So I just want to mention some things, just big picture before we go into more detail. The individual, the immigrant could be abroad while this is happening. That's one thing. Or you could be here. You could be here in the US and you might not be working for the employer at the point. The other thing is that if you're here in the US, the immigrant, you need to have your own visa and your own thing, because this PERM process does not give you work authorization during its pendency. So generally when I'm having a conversation and a consultation of exploring options, a person might be on an H-1B or, I mean, not often a TN, but preferably it's an H-1B, honestly, or some other visa that we know we can get enough time and that there's not a conflict about a dual intent, and that usually people are wanting to work while they're waiting for this to go forward. Okay, so the applicants must first meet the following requirements: that they have a permanent job offer from a lawful U.S. employer. A wage package offered to the applicant must be equal or above the prevailing wage for that position. And we'll go into a little bit more about that, but that's why it's really important. Someone says, I want to sponsor somebody. We're like, okay, well, tell me the job description and tell me the job title. All of that is so critical. And why? Because it's for determining the prevailing wage. And if, and I'm a small business owner, so sometimes you call somebody something and that might not be really like the title, like sometimes banks call everybody a vice president, but they have like 5,000 vice presidents, but some companies, they use their titles more conservatively. So this is basically a science to figuring out what the Department of Labor, mirroring what you do in your firm to what the Department of Labor calls things. And that's where you have to have a PERM expert who helps guide you to finding the title and the job description, because it can vary, from industry to industry and company to company. And so the prevailing wage is essential because that prevailing wage needs to be paid by the time of legal permanent residency. Now, the local job, and the other thing that's important about that is if the prevailing wage is beyond the means for the company, maybe they say, yes, I'm going to pay that, but they don't have the financial proof to prove that they can pay that. It all is a part of the big picture. So that's really critical. They also have to prove that the local job market must have properly analyzed for U.S. candidates. So this is where you're documenting the recruiting process, and explain, posting it in newspapers. And there's very specific rules on how it's done. If it's not done properly, it could be denied. And so that's why it's very detail oriented. And the U.S. employer must prepare and maintain an audit file with proof of attempts at recruitment. Applicant must demonstrate the uniqueness of his or her exceptional skills and cannot be duplicated by a U.S. qualified worker. So the U.S. employer must be able to provide these documents when making a PERM application. Now, and let me go back for a second. Generally, when we see consults on this, it's usually an immigrant is like, my company wants to sponsor me, but they don't have a firm that helps do this. They don't even know how to do this. They want to know more. And so we'll talk to the immigrant, and then we'll have a talk with the company. And it's very important to explain the matters of representation. We are truly trying to see if we can find a U.S. worker to do this job. And it's really important that the company is independent in that search. If they find a U.S. worker to do that's qualified, then this fails, because then they can't when they test the labor market, then they wouldn't be, and they find someone, they wouldn't be able to prove that that immigrant is the only one who can do the job. So it's really important in terms of protocol, how you explain how things are explained, and the representation in the matter, and potential conflict of interest, that we explain all of this at the onset, even though the company is very much wanting to hire this immigrant. There could be someone else out there. They just couldn't find them until they went through this process. So the U.S. employer must be able to provide these documents: the local labor market analysis, the prevailing wage request, and just getting the prevailing wage request can take several months. And so that is usually the first step, is determining that the title, the job description, and the position doesn't have to exist right now. It could be a position that in the future. And that so that's another thing that's important to note. But it also has to make sense with the size of the firm, the business, and to make sure that it doesn't seem out of line with the expertise of the business and the size of the business as well. The newspaper ads or printouts of the job ads are posted in the employer's website or that of a U.S. employer audit file. And even though a lot of people don't post on newspapers much anymore, this is still the requirement for the PERM process. And so you have to show that you've done your due diligence to try to fill this role. And then once everything is, you've gone through the whole process, then you can submit the I-140 visa petition. And you only have 6 months once you have the ETA 9089 to be able to file the I-140. And so this is really important to make sure that you do that. And then the other important thing to note is if the visa is available. If it is, then you would file the 485 concurrently if the person is in status and the visa is available. Otherwise, you could proceed through consular processing. So just a little, here's some proof of what some people do. Example, PERM employer website printout that they've posted the position, and then they show a date and time to prove that they actually did post this position. They do print screens, but there's a lot of different things that you can do to prove that it was posted. You want to document, and then putting it in ads in newspapers, as well as the Sunday newspaper. So these all can be it can be a couple $1,000s that you have to calculate in your cost when you're doing the advertising process. Now, here's some processing times. These are approximate. COVID really threw a wrench in a lot of the government processing, and also let's just say wonky. I mean, the labor market, it's been weird, right? There was a lot of there were layoffs but then now there's like a hiring shortage, it seems like. So I don't know, like one 15-month period. So normally when there's high unemployment rates, then the PERM process is definitely hurt by that, because you're saying that you can't find a U.S. worker to do this job. But when there's a shortage of workers and there's a low unemployment rate, then this is more reasonable that you're going to need an immigrant worker to be able to perform this duty. So when we have the consult, and then everybody signs the contract and we're paid to get started, we do a questionnaire for the employee and the employer, and we ask lots of questions, and then we prepare the prevailing wage determination. And then we submit off that job title and description as per the requirements needed, and we wait. And that can in its own take about 4-ish months just to get the prevailing wage back. It depends on lots of different factors. But if the comes back too high for the company to pay, then they would have to do some changes to the process to submit another one and start all over again. Or if there's a change in the like the company, EIN, or some substantial change in that respect, then you would potentially have to start over again. So then you would do the good faith recruitment and testing the labor market. And then you would be filing the labor certification and wait to receive the decision from the DOL. Once you have all of that, which 6 is way too low. This is probably more of a year, potentially a little over a year. Then you can you have to file the I-140 within 6 months. And the I-140 can be done with you can premium process that. The processing times do vary. This is what I've seen. Under the last year, 2020, under the Trump administration, things were taking a long time. Now, and prevailing wage premium processing wasn't allowed for everything. Now, under the Biden administration, things are picking up a lot faster. And premium processing, unfortunately, the filing fee had gone up to $2,500. So some people don't want to have to pay that new amount. It's almost doubled. But for a lot of people, they want to have that certainty. And so you'll find out within 3 business weeks, basically, whether there's a request for evidence, approval, or what their decision is. So if so many people, if the visa is current and the immigrant's in status, you can file the 45 concurrently with the I-140. What we're seeing is if you file the I-140 and the 45 concurrently, you are getting work authorization within about 5 to 8 months, approximately. It also depends on where you're located. If you have work authorization based on another visa, and then you get the work authorization based on the 45 pending, that's great. Once you have that, you can use the 45 based work authorization. But basically, there's lots of different things to consider. By the time you get to this, you can file the I-140. You're looking around to say, is the person in status? Are they still in the U.S.? Is the visa available? And you have to make some decisions as to whether or not you want to premium process. And the other thing is, you're only going to premium process the I-140 if you premium process anything. You can't premium process the adjustment of status. And we didn't put on here, but really you can do consular processing as well. And last conference I was at, I heard something along the lines of that the consular corps is down to 25%. And I have been seeing that they are sending more officers to the embassies and consulates, but it's definitely not up to par with where it was before 4 years ago. And COVID. So why am I saying all of that? It's because if you really have to do consular processing, it still could take a long time because there's just not fully staffed, and there's a huge backlog from this last year. So we've covered a lot of material here, Dana. We've got so things to note about: there's no filing fee for the PERM applications, but things you do need to keep in mind are the job placements. Like I mentioned, we usually budget around, I think, 2,500 is a good estimate. The filing fee for the I-140 is 700. The premium processing is 2,500. And so that is incorrect here on the PowerPoint, but it is also for the 45, you need to consider it ends up being 1,225 per adult. And so these are some of the costs you have to consider. Now there's some cases when you don't need to have the labor certification, and there's a waiver of that. The national interest waiver is one that we generally talk about with if a person doesn't even need a job offer with the national interest waiver, and you're basically saying that it's so much in the interest of the United States that we are going to waive needing the labor certification for this process. So here's some other possibilities where you don't need the labor certification to get the green card: EB-4 for religious workers, EB-5 the investors, Schedule A immigrant petitions. But we were talking about PERM today, and the labor certification is the huge component to that. And so you must have that to move forward. But there's some cases where you can waive it. So we're coming to the end. Unless you have any questions, I hope this was helpful. So Dana, how can people find us in the future?
Yeah, of course. So thank you again, Ruby. And please, guys, we urge you all to follow us on our social media. And again, if you missed any of our past presentations, they're on our YouTube. And our YouTube is Ruby Powers Law, and they're also on our Facebook. And we are very active on our social medias as well. And our handle is Ruby Powers Law on all of our social medias. We do urge you guys to follow us. And also, we have our bi-weekly newsletter that goes out again every other week. And we fill it up, jam-pack it with new immigration policy changes, the latest in immigration, maybe court openings, all that fun stuff. So we do say to subscribe to that. And where can you subscribe? Bam, go to our website, rubypowerslaw.com right here. I don't know if you guys can see me point. And then it's an automatic pop-up where you all can sign in. But that's pretty much it. We're going to go ahead and let you guys know what our next webinar is going to be about. And let me see. Our next webinar is going to be on doing business in the U.S. investment options for immigrants. So wow, another fun topic that we're going to be discussing. I'll be dropping the registration link down below so you guys can go ahead and register. And Ruby, it looks like we have a question. Thank you for the presentation. Applying for PERM while being a student, F1 visa can be considered as dual intent? Question mark.
Well, so the basics are that the F1, as you probably already know, is a non-immigrant visa. And once you file the I-140, then you've shown your immigrant intent. So it really depends on the timing of it all. If you're on an F1 and you qualify, an employer cannot find a U.S. worker to do the job once you, then if you are in a status and you're not renewing your F1, but you have plenty of time left on your F1 before you file the I-140, then that can work. But generally what I found is that most people it depends on what your status is. Our F1 is a master's, and do you meet the qualifications, and can they not find another US worker to do that job? If you're doing a bachelor's, usually that's harder to prove, especially if you depending on the experience needed for that company. But the timing can still work. It's just that it really comes down to what's the validity of your F1, how much time do you have to do the PERM, and when will you be filing the I-140. And maybe what could happen is you're doing it while you're here on F1, you're doing the most of the work, and then you're doing the I-140 while you're abroad or something like that. So it is doable. You just have to coordinate with the timeline as much as possible. And I mean, that's why they give you that ability. Also, I mean, generally you see these happen more for the H-1Bs. Mm-hmm. And that's why, H-1Bs, they give you the amount of time that they do, is because usually people work there for a few years and then they find the company says, I want to sponsor you, and then they'll still have a little bit more time. And then while once the I-140 is processed and pending, you can continue to do extensions on the H-1B. So those are just some things that you would consider, and that's a really good question. We've done PERMs for people in TN F1, but it is something that you have to monitor lots of different factors, and can be a little bit more trickier than doing it with an H-1B or somebody who might not be in the country. So thank you for that question. Thanks for all those who watched today. And next week is going to be interesting. We're going to continue in that the immigration, employment, and investment space. So today was about the legal permanent residency, the petition for employment based through PERM. And next week we have a guest speaker as well. And we're going to be talking about investment. And the reason why we're also bringing that up next week is because of the entrepreneurial visa that came out just about 2 weeks ago or something like that. So super excited to talk about that. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching, and have a great weekend.
Thank you guys. Be safe out there. Hopefully we don't have too much rain in Houston.